All right, welcome everyone. Um, Welcome everyone, and thanks to the Paris Peace Forum for hosting this event. My name is Caitlin O'Donnell, and I'm a technical advisor on the Ultra Poor Graduation Initiative at BRAC. Before we get started, I'd like to give a little bit of background on BRAC. BRAC is a development organization that was founded in Bangladesh in 1972 and now reaches over 100 million people in 11 countries across Asia and Africa through programs in education, healthcare, financial inclusion, youth empowerment, and agriculture. And today we're talking about BRAC's Ultra Poor Graduation Initiative. If you could go back to the first slide, please. We're talking about BRAC's Ultra Poor Graduation Initiative. What is graduation? Before we get started, I just want to tell you what it is in a nutshell. Graduation can also be referred to as cash plus, productive inclusion, economic and social inclusion. And graduation is a development approach designed to address the multidimensional needs of the extreme poor. It's a comprehensive combination of interventions that are time-bound, sequenced, and layered to create one big push to propel the poorest out of poverty. In today's presentation, we will start by talking about Corazon, who is a program participant in BRAC's graduation pilot in the Philippines. And we'll talk about how and why the graduation approach came about. We'll unpack some of the key components of the graduation approach and then discuss the Ultra Poor Graduation Initiative and our plans to work with and through governments to create systems change towards the goal of ending extreme poverty. Finally, we'll end with a Q&A session, so I asked you to please hold your questions for this time. So let's get started. To tell you about graduation, I'd like to tell you a story about Corazon. She is a mother of 3. She has 2 sons and a daughter. You can see her daughter in this photo here. And they live in the southern peri-urban region of Bacolod in the Philippines. Before joining the graduation program, she struggled to find steady work, and she barely made enough money to put food on the table and pay her children's school fees. She was in debt. So life was hard for her, and no matter how much she worked, she, like tens of millions of people, was stuck in the poverty trap. Next slide, please. Then Corazon became a participant in BRAC's graduation project in partnership with the government of the Philippines and the Asian Development Bank. Through the project, she established multiple income-generating enterprises to diversify her streams of income. So she raises chickens, which you can see here, she raises swine, and she also owns a convenience stand. And she's built up her resilience through having these multiple livelihoods, and that's been really vital for her and her family during the long COVID lockdowns in the Philippines. She's also been able to pay off her debt, allowing her to create savings and to be ready for any health or climate shocks should they arise. Next slide, please. Here we see Corazon with her graduation coach, and mentorship or coaching is one of the cornerstone components of the graduation program. So she meets regularly with her coach, who provides training and mentorship to support her to meet her goals. These mentorship activities were able to continue through the pandemic following the safety and health guidelines of the government of the Philippines. And the coaches have been really critical in helping to support the participants to pivot their livelihoods, to spread health messaging about COVID-19, and to connect those in need with additional government support. Next slide. So through the graduation program, Corazon has not only greatly improved her life, but also that of her children. They now have access to healthcare, regular schooling, and she can pass on the knowledge that she's gained through her work in the program to her kids, as well as other members of the community. And while the official program interventions have ended for Corazon, the program just wrapped up this October, she's now in a position to continue her upward progress for years to come. To understand how and why graduation came about, let's travel from the Philippines to Bangladesh. Next slide. Here I'd like to read you this quote from the founder of BRAC, Sir Fazle Abed. It says, "Poverty is not just poverty of money or of income, but also poverty of self-esteem, hope, opportunity, and freedom. People often don't realize their own activities can change their lives. Once they understand that, it's like a light gets turned on. And these words exemplify BRAC's mission and vision. That eradicating poverty is something that we think about every day at BRAC, and all the work that we do is focused is shaped by this focus on hope and agency. We at BRAC are dedicated to empowering people living in poverty to be agents of change in their own lives. And this is the ethos of the graduation approach. Next slide. So how did graduation get started, and why did BRAC pioneer the approach? It started from learning from failure. So BRAC had a very successful microfinance program but in the 1990s, they realized that its microfinance programs in Bangladesh weren't reaching the poorest, and that microfinance alone wasn't enough for the poorest and most vulnerable. Not only were they facing really meager incomes, but other barriers to escaping extreme poverty, and they needed a more holistic solution. So BRAC started experimenting with interventions between the 1990s, and in 2002, they landed on and pioneered a more holistic approach targeted at the ultra poor. And graduation consists of a combination of interventions that are comprehensive, time-bound, sequenced, and layered to create one big push and address the needs of the very poorest. BRAC found that this comprehensive approach, graduation, enables people to pull themselves from extreme poverty and to be the agents of change in their own lives. To date, BRAC has reached over 9 million people in Bangladesh. And beyond Bangladesh, BRAC's Ultra Poor Graduation Initiative works to test and scale graduation globally through direct implementation, technical assistance, and advocacy. The Ultra Poor Graduation Initiative works with government partners and other development partners to adapt the graduation approach in each country specific to the local context and effectively integrate it into existing government programming and policies. Next slide, please. To talk about what graduation is, I think it's important to talk about who does graduation target, who are the extreme poor, what do their lives look like. A common benchmark to define extreme poverty is that the extreme poor live on less than $1.90 a day. This is the World Bank's International Poverty Line. And this is certainly an important factor, but extreme poverty is multidimensional. It includes this consumption measure, but also goes beyond that. If we think about Corazon and her family and their barriers, her story is similar to a lot of other extreme poor around the world and the barriers that they face, which include chronic food insecurity, lack of access to mainstream social protection services, vulnerability to health shocks, natural disasters, lack of market access, among others. Tackling the multidimensional barriers of extreme poverty requires a multidimensional solution. So next I'll unpack what some of those multidimensional solutions typically look like. And I'll start by talking about the framework of the graduation approach. Next slide. So BRAC has worked to adapt the graduation approach to various country contexts, from Bangladesh to Kenya to the Philippines to Tunisia, by distilling the essence of the most common barriers that face the extreme poor. And they fall along 4 key dimensions that we call the 4 foundational graduation pillars. The first is basic needs, to provide immediate relief for social protection. The second, income generation, to develop productive livelihood activities, businesses or enterprises. The third, social empowerment, to promote inclusion and behavior change. And the fourth, banking and savings, to provide income management and increase savings. So these are the core inextricable pillars of the graduation approach that work together to drive the outcomes of the approach. And this is what distinguishes graduation from other single instrument or integrated development approaches that might provide disparate packages of services to the poor. Graduation's interventions are interwoven and they're mutually reinforcing. So we use these pillars as a guide that allows us to have greater flexibility and a higher degree of adaptation that's appropriate to a given context, as opposed to a more components-based approach, because what works in Bangladesh may or may not work in Kenya and vice versa. Next slide, please. So here you can see, I wanted to provide just each graduation program is different. It is all based on the local context, but they share some common interventions, and I just wanted to give an idea of what example interventions look like along the 4 pillars. So for example, under the pillar of meeting basic needs, an example intervention or component of a graduation project might be consumption support, a healthcare stipend. Under income generation, this typically includes an asset transfer or a grant to develop a productive business, which is preceded by training in business management and technical skills to make that business successful. Under banking and savings, the intervention typically includes savings group paired with financial literacy trainings and sometimes linkages to formal financial inclusion opportunities where that's available. Under social empowerment, there's typically life skills trainings, which includes trainings on health and social topics like child marriage, because one of the key goals for the graduation program is gender equality and women's empowerment. And then also regular coaching and mentorship. If we think back to the image with Corazon and her coach, this is one of the key cornerstones of the graduation approach. So BRAC views graduation as being predicated upon providing a set of interventions that are tailored, meaning appropriate to the context, time-bound. Program interventions typically last between 18 and 24 months. Sequenced, for example, it's critical that the participants receive the business training ahead of receiving the asset transfer or the grant so that they're prepared to make their business successful. So some models of graduation programs will include all of the example components that I named, while others will leverage what already exists to create more sustainable linkages. So for example, a government might have an existing cash transfer program that can be leveraged and integrated into the graduation program. Next slide, please. If we think about the graduation approach in terms of our participants' journey, here you can see the transition from before, when participants and their households have limited skills, assets, access to healthcare, savings, community resources, and food, to after. BRAC's graduation model offers a transition to greater self-sufficiency, autonomy, and dignity for participants. Think of Corazon and the many things she was able to achieve through her participation in the project. To be considered graduated, in the BRAC model of graduation, households must meet what we call graduation criteria. And these are contextually specific social and economic thresholds. So just to give one example, they're specific to each program, but to give one example, under financial inclusion, this might include the total value of household savings accumulated. That might be one criteria. And the graduation criteria are set to address the multidimensional barriers that the extreme poor populations face and to demonstrate that they've reached a level of resilience that safeguards them from falling back into extreme poverty even after the program ends. At its core, graduation is focused on building the agency of the program participants by providing them with the tools, the resources, and the practice to lift themselves out of poverty, to pass on their skills and knowledge, and to be able to continue building on their progress after their participation in the program ends. Next slide. So these are some of the key takeaways of what BRAC's graduation model is. Graduation is an effective and sustainable solution that contributes to long-term gains for the recovery and resilience of the extreme poor. And a key element of its success in Bangladesh and beyond is adaptation and a context-specific approach. So in Bangladesh, the graduation program there has been operating since 2002, and they've used nearly 20 years of learning, research, and evidence to continue to evolve the program. Since 2013, the Ultra Poor Graduation Initiative has worked with government partners and other development partners to adapt and scale the graduation approach globally. And a deep understanding of the context is critical when we adapt the programs across geographies, across contexts, across vulnerable subgroups. Furthermore, graduation is replicable. As part of its Nobel Prize winning work with randomized control trials, the Innovations for Poverty Action, IPA, and MIT conducted randomized control trials to test whether graduation works in other countries. And they demonstrated that graduation can be replicated across countries with positive and lasting results. And finally, graduation can be scaled globally. It's already at scale at Bangladesh. BRAC has graduated 2 million households since 2002 with a 95% graduation rate. And now other development actors have taken graduation through nearly 100 graduation programs that exist in over 40 countries. So our question now is how to reach scale globally. And this is the mission of the Ultra Poor Graduation Initiative. And we believe the key to that mission is government partners. Next slide. To reflect on the current challenge in terms of extreme poverty, according to the World Bank, by the end of 2020, 88 to 115 million people are predicted to join the already 700 million people living in extreme poverty. With millions more people being pushed back into poverty or deeper into poverty as a result of COVID-19, addressing the needs of the extreme poor through sustainable, resilience-building interventions with long-term impacts has never been more urgent. And we at BRAC believe that government and global action is critical to scale graduation, social protection, and economic inclusion. Next slide. And because we believe this, BRAC has been testing and scaling graduation globally through direct implementation, technical assistance, and advocacy effort since 2013. And through our technical assistance efforts, we've already been working with government partners and development partners to integrate the graduation approach into existing government programming and resources. Through this holistic approach, next slide, please. Through this holistic approach, graduation can be one of the many solutions that are needed to help make meaningful progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals, especially for SDG 1, putting an end to extreme poverty by 2030. Next slide, please. Towards these goals, we are proud to partner with the Paris Peace Forum. We've been collaborating with the Paris Peace Forum since its launch in 2018, and we were named a Paris Peace Forum Scale-Up Project in 2018. So we are really grateful for the Paris Peace Forum support, including advocacy, marketing, and social media support to advance our strategy and build partnerships. These partnerships and others have helped the Ultra Poor Graduation Initiative to catalyze our mission to scale graduation globally through governments in a big way. Next slide, please. In June 2020, BRAC was named a TEDx Audacious Prize winner and received a project investment of $65 million. As part of our new strategy to reach our goals for the Audacious project, the Ultra Poor Graduation Initiative aims to reach 21 million people in extreme poverty by 2026. And BRAC plans to do this through two key strategies to influence and strengthen government action for large-scale systems change. The first is to shape global dialogue to influence action through advocacy efforts, and the second is to work on the ground in key countries to support government adoption. Next slide, please. So BRAC plans to work on both a global ecosystems level through policy change and advocacy, and also on a national level, working on the ground with national governments and other implementing partners to build on the work we've been doing since 2013, but in a much bigger way. We're calling on government partners to invest in social protection programming and in human capital. And we're calling on multilaterals and other development partners to support discussion and development around policy and systems change. Next slide. So to wrap up, to effectively move the needle and help governments meet their sustainable development goals and make up for the extreme losses on poverty due to the COVID pandemic, we must change the way that we think about extreme poverty and the way that we address it. To address extreme poverty on a large scale, we believe that governments must be equipped to integrate and sustainably scale graduation in their own systems and make a commitment to those who are most at risk. Without integrated, comprehensive, tailored programs for the most vulnerable of the poor, the extreme poverty rate will become increasingly harder to budge. So let's work together to advocate for those living in extreme poverty and to ensure that no one is left behind. Thank you. So now I'd like to answer some of your questions. We do have a very hard stop at 9:30, I understand. So if I'm in the middle of answering a question, I'll just say now. Thanks to the Paris Peace Forum and thanks to everyone for your time in participating today. I have some questions here sent through. Let me read them. So one of the questions is, how has the COVID-19 crisis affected the project? Have you found the extreme poverty issue to have been set aside during the pandemic? This is a really great question. Thank you. I anticipated this question might come up. So Sean, if you could go to the next slide. One or two more, maybe. Another one. Apologies, another one. So yes, the COVID-19 crisis has affected all of us, and it's affected the projects as well. But we've seen a renewed and increased interest in strengthened social protection programs and in a need for long-term, for both for managing the crisis right now and then beyond that to help those who've been pushed into poverty or pushed deeper into poverty. So to share a little bit about how we've tried to adapt and pivot on a quick scale, this slide tells us a little bit about how graduation is an effective pathway to economic recovery for COVID-19, some of the tactics like targeting households to identify the varying vulnerabilities during the crisis. But to answer your question a little more directly, if you could go to the next slide, Sean. I wanted to provide a few examples of what's been going on in the program. So in Bangladesh, in terms of evidence of economic resilience that's continued in spite of the pandemic, we see that 93% of low-income households experienced a marked decline in income during the pandemic generally. But for those who participating in the ultra-poor graduation project, 95% of the participants continued to engage in their income generating activities, and 96% of them resumed regular savings when the program activities were resumed. So some of the ways that the program tried to pivot and provide more during this intense time was by providing vegetable seeds to the participants to maintain their food security and add another source of income, to connect participants to local government assistance, even more linkages through the village solidarity committees that are formed as part of the program in Bangladesh, and by providing information to participants engaged in agricultural enterprises. If you go to the next slide, Sean, there's more similar information about how we've responded in the Philippines. So similarly, the participants continued through the pandemic with their livelihoods. They kept their livelihoods and they continued to access savings. And the program also has responded adaptively in the ways listed here. I'll go ahead and try to take another. I could talk about this for a long time, but I'll go ahead and try to take another question here. So yes, this question is, will you continue to develop the project in other countries, for example, in Latin America? So as part of the Audacious project, our plans are to focus in on a few priority countries that we've identified along a number of measures. So for us, the countries that we anticipate focusing on will likely be in Africa and in South and Southeast Asia. And we will continue to develop the work that we're already doing and to try to expand it and scale up, specifically through partnerships with government to try to reach systems change. All right, another question. Another question. Okay, so how do you coordinate with local or international NGOs fighting extreme poverty and those working in the field of education? All right, yes, so this is a good question. A key part of the work that we do is in building linkages. And so part of the answer to your question is that we do coordinate with local or international NGOs depending on the kind of project that we're working with. I'll give an example. So in Kenya, Sean, if you could go back a few slides to a slide on Kenya. Yes, this one. Okay, so for example, with a project that we did in Kenya, we worked in partnership not only with the government of Kenya and its national treasury, but also with the funder IFAD. And to answer your question, we worked with BOMA and CARE, BOMA is a local NGO in Kenya and CARE is as an international NGO, and they were the direct implementing partners in this case. And the Ultra Poor Graduation Initiative was providing overall coordination and technical assistance, and we worked to support those two NGOs who were implementing the project directly. In addition, a second part of the answer is around linkages that are created through the program. So a key part of what we do, because graduation has such a focus on holistic solutions, is we try to work through the government to create linkages, for example, especially with departments of health, departments of agriculture, and in some instances with educational efforts. One of the challenges that we see with the population that we work with are low literacy and numeracy levels, and that can sometimes be addressed in the training depending on its depth and the aim of the program. So we do work in coordination with other local and international NGOs, and as part of our audacious plan, we plan to scale up that kind of work in capacity building on the local level for NGOs in a really big way. So that's a really exciting part of the plan moving forward, is to engage with civil society and to build capacity to enable more and better and strengthen social protection, economic inclusion, and social inclusion programming that's in line with the goals of the graduation approach. All right, we have 1 minute left. I'll try to answer the last question. I wonder if there's somewhere we can find the research you've made about some countries. So you can, if you go back maybe 1 or 2 slides, Sean, you can go to this. Oh, sorry, one more. The final slide with just the image. The other way. Yes, thank you so much. Okay, so this is the website that you can go to, bracultrapoorgraduation.org. There you can find more information about our research, external research on the graduation program, as well as some of our plans and strategies to work. I see the second part of your question is whether we'll work directly in countries or through technical assistance. The answer will be some combination of both. It will depend on the country and the context. I think that's it. So thank you, everyone.